So today we're going to get into Rudolf Steiner's vision of the Threefold Commonwealth. And it's a structure. I'm going to have you explain it here in a second, but it's a structure of economic, political, and cultural, spiritual spheres. One of the things I think people need to understand, and I'll kind of put a quick backdrop and then you can go from there, Eric. But, Rudolf Steiner in this time, I think it was like 1917, he talked to a German politician, 1919 around there, it seems like. So, after World War I, there was 200 million people killed, 200 million injured, so and then you have life in those days was pretty miserable. Like if you're in a factory, like most people were working a factory, almost like you would consider it slave labor. And so when Karl Marx books gets passed around, you have to think of people's brains in that time. That's why I love what Jordan Peterson says about, don't think that you wouldn't be the Nazi that raises his hand. Like you're not going to be the guy. You're not that special where you're going to be the guy that's going to go against it. We're going to be, 99.9%. So you had socialism coming on the scene, communism hitting really hard. You had fascism happening also, these two fronts, and we can kind of see this in the United States today. What were some of the views and some of the things that you saw, Eric, when it came to that time when Rudolf Steiner released this?
Well, it's interesting. Before World War I, there was this whole return to Kantianism, especially among German thinkers. And there had already been a lot of what we might call philosophies of will, right, with Nietzsche, you're percolating under the surface. So in the German Empire, heading up to the First World War, there was an interesting kind of idealism. Henri Bergson was quite big, and it seems like people were moving toward some kind of a rapprochement between the between the external mental world and the internal. Everybody's always trying to bring spirit and matter together, and it seemed like it was happening in Europe to some degree. World War I blew all of that out of the water, and as you say, sort of gave new life to Marxism, especially in as much as Marxism is a totalitarian ideology. And this not necessarily improperly, whatever conspiracy theories may be out there, that Marxism was, brought to you by the bankers of the Western world, as was the First World War. So what you have is this concerted attempt to basically get all the marbles. And Marxism, feeds so well into that because it just fosters the resentment of the lower classes. And so once again, you've got this bizarre alliance between the super rich and those who own nothing, with the common enemy being in the middle. And so who was the middle then? The middle then was the bourgeois state, the liberal state trying to get its feet on the ground. And so when Steiner had no particular love for the liberal state, he thought modern materialism was deficient. So Steiner's contribution to all of this during the First World, or prior to the First World War, was to sort of reinvigorate, getting back to Western Eastern philosophies, to reinvigorate the West with a kind of native spirituality that was its own. Right? And so if the Western people could effectively, revivify their own spiritual traditions, they wouldn't need any extremist forms of modernization, which fascism and communism both are. All they are is corrupt liberalism.
Right.
So when World War I hit, however it came to pass, whoever brought it into being, and the evidence that the financial establishment was the mastermind behind all of this is the evidence is overwhelming, and we don't need to be squeamish about that. Whenever you have massive wars and massive conflicts, when the smoke is cleared, the assets and the money in the world are in the hands of a much smaller group of people, right? So that's
when you can fund both sides.
Especially when you can fund both sides. So this is what I think whatever salubrious and healthy effects the philosophical world was bringing into being, and there were many of them. The war just provided an ample opportunity for the scoundrels to to position themselves to get everything. And here we are 100 years after the end of that war, and they're about to do it.
100%.
So
do you feel like, and I want to get into that, and I encourage everybody to listen towards the end, because we're going to take this Threefold Commonwealth plan and put it into the United States, the economic, political, and the cultural, spiritual side of things. Before we get fully into this, because you just said something I think is important, is scoundrels. Can you kind of give a quick overview of there being spiritual warfare? Like, this is not just that there are evil people and there's evil in the world, and then there's good. So when we look at this, and I kind of want to, if you could put yourself in Steiner's brain when he's making this with his spiritual perspective.
Yeah, and I'll use Steiner's ideas and not mine, so as to avoid any scandal here. But Steiner was fully aware that after 1879, I think we talked about this in the past shows, when a war in heaven resulted in the casting down of the fallen angels to earth. And Steiner wrote about this heavily during World War I, right? The fall of the dark spirits, and so you got the fall of evil spirits coming into the earthly realm. And so with that, in the 1880s and 90s in particular, occultism was rampant in Europe, especially among the elites. So all these people were getting involved in seances, and it doesn't matter where you go, with Southern California or the elites in Vienna and Berlin and England, they were all there. And having abandoned religion, they were all trying to figure out this mutually productive project of gaining more money and then using all of their wealth to somehow imagine that they were gods or something. And this is a real potent impulse in the last decades of the 19th century. And so yes, there were people, what Steiner calls them the left-handed path, the left-handed groups, who were actively conducting seances and actively conducting what you might call communications with the dead in such a way. And this is what a lot of the political assassinations, which really ramped up at the end of the 19th century, were attempts to sort of commandeer, this sounds really crazy, but an attempt to commandeer the etheric body of a fallen head of state or something as they're transitioning into the next life, and then actually use them, to deploy them to bring about material changes down on this earthly realm. Now, and Steiner wrote a really interesting poem prayer to the fallen in World War One. As you mentioned, millions and millions and millions of guys who were killed as this war. And part of World War One, as above, so below, right? That these fallen souls are also being enlisted into a massive spiritual battle. And which comes first, the chicken or the egg, is really hard to determine. But there was an active and prodigious occultism taking place, and then as now.
That's what I was fixing to say. We're seeing the same thing play out now.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if there's a spiritual war gearing up, or if there's like another, Michael type thing happening. But I do know that this seems to be kind of the same scenario.
Yeah.
Because we with the worship of AI, with the worship of science as it was back then, and then also there seems to be these weird occultic practices that are popping up again amongst the elite.
Well, absolutely. And we're afraid to talk about this, I guess, because the media is more or less owned and operated by them. And it used to be that the media had a hands-off approach to the wealthy and powerful. Now they are the wealthy and powerful.
Yes.
So, and so what's so scary about this is, as we wake up to these realities, the natural collective reaction should be revulsion. And we need to stop this now. And instead, it's like, how can I get in on the game? It's horrifying.
Yeah, but you can see it even to the point of what's happening now with whether it's Ukraine and Russia, or whether it's Hamas and Gaza and Israel and all that. All of this is just huge distractions. Well, but it's at the sake of human lives.
Well, they're distractions and they're also tactics, because
Yes,
one
100%.
thing about these people is they feed on
Hmm.
mayhem and misery and karmic disturbances. This is their nutriment. The fear and the horror. I mean, you want to talk about adrenochrome and all this stuff. This isn't all a joke. That
Right.
this is the real thing. And so when they can create mass havoc, they don't care who wins or loses. They like the mass havoc because they win. I mean, and I don't see how anybody can really, you know, deny this anymore. If you don't see that the world is being controlled by a small group of very powerful people, then you just suffer from an inability to process information. You're not a better person because you don't indulge in conspiracy theories. You're not looking at the world. And so all the stuff we're looking at, Steiner and Mark, this goes back a long, long time. But we've just got what we call the normalcy bias, where we just don't want to deal with this, and we want to pretend that elections matter and that our pop culture speaks for the people, and none of this is true.
Yeah, in Egypt, you had that god priest-like, elitist, where they were untouchable, and that's, I think, the goal. I think that's where they want to be at.
The Egyptian pharaohs had nothing on these people. They would envy the power that a mid-level exec at CBS Records. This is kind of it's really amazing, because something that you mentioned before too, and you're familiar with Steiner's discussion of the Ahrimanic Advent, right? Ahriman,
Yes, 100%.
right? So the AI and these are just new ways for the Ahrimanic thing to incarnate,
Materialism, yeah.
right? So yeah, we shouldn't be, and we're here we are, figuring out how to negotiate with it or something. It's very bizarre to me.
I
But
agree 100%.
it's
And
this.
thus, this was the reason for the Threefold Commonwealth. And
Mm,
this is Steiner's vision of what he wanted to bring about, because he wanted to have this structure. So can you kind of, for like laymen like myself, this social philosophy, can you kind of, like outline it, and then we'll get into each one in particular?
Absolutely. So if we, as you pointed out, and I think 1917 is about right. He started talking about this stuff during the war. I think he realized very quickly. I mean, he knew that Germany would probably not come out on top. And for a guy who was let's just get into the Threefold Commonwealth. Steiner had an abiding disdain for Woodrow Wilson. So, which is clear whenever he mentions the name Woodrow Wilson. But he saw, as you also pointed out earlier, that Marxism was starting to hold sway over the minds and hearts of Europeans. So he came up with this new social order. It was funny because this is a guy who'd spent all of his life talking about gnomes and fairies and Christ consciousness, and now in the early 20s, once the war is over, he's talking very specifically about recreating the social, political, and economic order. So the Threefold Commonwealth, as he envisioned it, was just that to take the three organs of human civilization or culture. Well, all these words will start lapping back on each other, so I'll be careful here. There are three organs of the Threefold Commonwealth. One is the political sphere, that has one and only one job, which is to preserve the equality of rights inside a state structure. The second was economics, and its one and only job was to see to the efficient and fair distribution of goods and services, leading up to a fully employed economy where wages reflected the true price of commodities and labor. And that, I should say, was related to brotherhood. And then finally, the last, which is the cultural or the spiritual sphere, which would cover religion, culture, schools, art, everything having to do with literature and education and religion. And this would all belong to its own autonomous organ. So each of these three things, he links them, he sees them as sort of an evolved uh, an evolved version of the French Revolution's liberté, égalité, and fraternité, right? So you have the three, and he said that those three things, when they came out during the French Revolution, were all abominations. You have a bloodbath, the execution of people en masse. So after World War One, these things could come to maturity and be the foundation of three different organs or associations of a properly run country, I guess.